Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to another episode of What's on My CD Wall. Yes, this is where I am going through each and every CD on my CD wall here. So, a while back I did a What's in My 12,000 CD collection, which is really just an overview of things. Now I'm actually going through CD by CD individually, hitting them all for you. We have covered the top tier of this, which started in the A's. We continued into the B's. We did some more B's here. Now we're going to get down to the fourth shelf in this series here. We're just in the rock area. Some of you guys have asked me about metal bands and alternative bands and glam metal and different genres. Well, I have those in different areas. So right now, just in rock, and we'll get into that here in just a bit. But before we do, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're gonna stay up to date on everything going on in the world of music, just like this, where we are going through what's on my CD wall. So first up, I am wearing a Cheap Trick t-shirt because we are in the letter C, but we're not actually going to hit any Cheap Trick here because I pulled all of mine out and grouped it together in a box like this. Each of these boxes hold 30 CDs, so this one looks like it's just shy at this point of it, but with a few more Cheap Trick releases, we will fill this thing up. But I've got stuff in here that's like, of course, their latest album. I've got, other favorites from past days in here. We jump back into one of my favorites from the early 90s. And of course, classic stuff like Busted and going all the way back to All Shook Up and Dream Police. Of course, we got Budokan in here. We have the debut, but I've also got stuff in here like Bunny Carlos, the drummer, solo stuff. I've got Robin Zander's first solo album and even his unreleased second solo album, Countryside Boulevard. This is a promo-only copy sent out for reviews. Then the album was recalled, never released. I've got a copy of it. So it's one of my favorite things in my collection. But I just wanted to do a quick little overview there of that since I'm wearing the Cheap Trick t-shirt and we're going to be getting into the letter C here. But we actually have to start off with a few B's that rolled over from the third shelf here onto the fourth one. And I'm going to start with a couple of them that are just on top here, and it is King Crimson Man, Adrian Belew. This is called Side 1. And I've got another one called Young Lions, album I really like by him. This was actually my first Adrian Belew solo project, or not solo project, but solo album that I picked up from him. After having gotten into King Crimson first through their 80s era with albums like Beat, which incidentally, Adrian Belew, Tony Levin have just formed a new group called Beat, which features Steve Vai on guitar and Danny Carey on drums from Tool, going out to promote that stuff. So fan like me of that era that started there, I since branched out into other stuff that I like from King Crimson, but I'm excited about that. So a couple Adrian Belew solo projects to kick things off. Beach Boys, their 70s era. This is a best of from the brother years that focuses on that 70s era of the band, which happens to be my favorite era. I do like the earlier stuff, but do really enjoy that period. I do have something here, Sounds of Summer, which covers, of course, all the classic stuff that most people would know. I have Surf's Up album in a cardboard case here. This one happens to be one of my friend's favorite albums, so I picked it up based on that to have in the collection and was not disappointed by it. Got this album here, a self-titled album from a very early 80s time frame. Trying to see if I can see the year. 85, actually, not very early, but 85 era there, right before they did Still Cruisin' that put them back on the map. And this was the very first thing by the Beach Boys I got back in the day. Songs like Still Cruisin', which was new at the time, but a lot of these were songs that had appeared in movies, and that was sort of the theme of this. So it also has Kokomo, which was their first #1 in a very long time. And then their last studio album until only just recently, Summer in Paradise. And this is one of those cases that was made a long box at the time, started off like this, and then after you bought it, you folded it up, into what became just your jewel case edition of it. But those of you that remember what long boxes are will know that. Not a lot of people like this album, but I enjoyed it. And then That's Why God Made the Radio, their latest and probably will be their last album. And this was a reunion album that featured the return of Brian Wilson, who had not been in the lineup for quite some time at that point. Moving on, we got some Babies, and I have some earlier stuff by them, but it's in a separate box where I keep all of my Rock Candy Records reissues. As I've mentioned before while doing this, a lot of times you're not going to see the big famous albums because I have them in different places. This is sort of overflow that you're seeing here, but newer album by the Babies. I'll have some of that. And we've got this one here, which was Anthology 2, because they have another anthology out with the bigger hits and stuff. So this focused on later era stuff, had both studio and live on it. Joe Bouchard from Blue Oyster Cult called Strange Legends, which was a really good album. I wasn't expecting it. This is one of those ones that I didn't pre-order, and it came out. I gave it a little listen, and I was really surprised by it. So I decided to add it to the collection. We got his brother Albert Bouchard and Imaginos. And so the Blue Oyster Cult of the same name, which we covered back here when we were on the second shelf there, was intended to be a solo album, became a Blue Oyster Cult album. And this is Re-Imaginos, where he does this in a 3-part series. I've only got the first one, but there are 2 more in that where he tells the complete story of it, building off of the original Blue Oyster Cult album. All right, Tony Banks from Genesis. This one here, A Curious Feeling, a 2 CD reissue of the original solo album from the Genesis keyboard player. But my favorite is The Fugitive. I really dig this album. Again, this was the one I started on that got me into him, and sounds a lot closer to what Genesis was in the 80s. So of course I really dug that, and then branched out from there and got much more into the progressive rock side of what Genesis is, but also what Tony Banks has done. This one here called Still. I think this was very early 90s, so this was much more the adult contemporary style stuff. Again, still along the lines of Genesis, but maybe even more of the adult contemporary style. Bank Statement, which is a Tony Banks project, a side project. There you can see him on the back. Boston, Greatest Hits. This one here we've got a little bit different than the regular one. So there's 2 versions of this that came out. This one here is the original, or I should say this one here is the original one, which had the 2 brand new songs, Tell Me and Higher Power. But they later reissued it, dropping the song Tell Me and adding in a song from a later day era album. I'm glad to have kept this one that had the 2 new original songs on it. That song Tell Me has never turned up on anything else. So if you weren't aware of that, the later versions had dropped it. Go back and find an older copy and you'll get an extra Boston track. All right. Badfinger, No Matter What. This is it's a tribute album, but we still have Joey Molland on, I think, bass and vocals, but he's in here with a lot of other guest people joining in and playing with them. Mark Stein of Vanilla Fudge, Rick Wakeman from Yes, Rick Springfield's on here. We got the legendary Pink Dots joining in, Albert Lee, Todd Rundgren. So that was kind of a fun album to get. The band, Greatest Hits. This is a group I've never really gotten into, but I respect them. Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm. And so I've got something in the collection. It's one of those ones where I'm kind of waiting for it to click at some point. Starting with that, and I did pick up one of their later day era albums, this one here, which is Jericho. And it, just depends on my mood. Sometimes I pull these things out and I listen to them. But that's one of those bands that I know a lot of people are really into. And as I said, I really respect the pedigree and everything and the legacy of it. But my taste's constantly changing. I know one of these days it's just going to kick in. Bucket & Co. So we've got Dave Bucket Colwell, who I know from having been in Bad Company, but he's also done other projects. He was in a reformed version of Humble Pie. We'll get to all that stuff later on. And here, Guitars, Beers, and Tears, album he did. Marty Balin. We got a twofer here. So we got the album Balin and we've got the album Lucky. It's on BGO reissue. So both those albums here from Jefferson Airplane Starship. Balance. We have another album of his, but this one here being a best of with some solo stuff, but also the Jefferson Airplane stuff. So like Today, Miracles, and then we get into some solo stuff. We've also got things on here from the KBC band, Kantner, Balin, Cassidy. All in all, very cool collection. Rhino Records did that. It's kind of hard to come by. Better Generation, another solo album from Marty Balin. Cry of Love, remember these guys? This was a great album, brother. The song Bad Thing and Peace Pipe off of this. Great stuff from like 1993. And second album, Cry of Love. But you know who is singing on this? None other than Robert Mason from Lynch Mob, and currently with Warrant. He also sang with The End Machine, with George Lynch, Jeff Pilson, Mick Brown. So essentially Dokken with him singing. He's on this here. All right, we get into some prog stuff here with the band Camel and their self-titled release, which happens to be my favorite album by them. And this one here, very different than what, of course, they would become known for. We've got this double twofer album here. This one here, Moon Madness is the title of this one. But we've also got the Snow Goose, which I think is probably their most famous or well-known album, at least. And then this one here, the Snow Goose, where they re-recorded it with a current lineup, nowhere near as good as the original, but I do like to hear those alternate editions, so I'm okay picking that stuff up. I dig it when it happens. I love to hear different versions of things. Cactus 5, picked this up really for Tim Bogart, Vinny Appice, doing stuff, but not so much for the band Cactus itself, but then of course got into Cactus. So a lot of times I'm listening to bands and I dig something and I say, oh, I'm into this band. Where did these guys come from? Oh, they came from an earlier band, Cactus. Let me go check that out. Band called Charlie, and this is a best of. You know, definitely melodic rock, sort of in the vein of Toto and that kind of stuff. Very adult contemporary sounding. And I've got a couple other stuff on vinyl, but wanted something on CD. Never really gotten into them so much so that I needed to pick up all of their releases, but definitely want to have a little bit of that in the collection. City Boy. Mike Slammer is a part of this lineup. Mike Slammer. I'm trying to think of who all he's played with because he's turned up in different places, and I know him from playing or backing up several prog rock guys. But he came from City Boy, so of course, one of those times wanting to know where he had come from. Streets, that's what I'm thinking of with the keyboard player from Kansas. So, you know, being into that and Streets and Mike Slammer, the guitar player, I had to go check this out. But that's how my mind works with a lot of these things. Jonathan Cain's solo album from Journey keyboard player, and of course, he was in the Babies. Back to the Innocents, and another one here, Where I Live. Coney Hatch, best of 3. So 3 solo albums there. I now own these reissues from Rock Candy Records. Again, they're just in a different location for me. They're not here with these. 4 new album that they had made, and they did just release a live album. I have to say, this album here, almost as good as anything they put out originally. This was another one that I wasn't going to pick up. I didn't think the band could possibly live up to their original stuff, but I picked this or listened to it and was so like moved by it and enjoyed it so much, I had to pick it up and add it. Chicago, the hits, greatest hits from 82 to 89. Yes, I know this is their love ballad phase, but that is the era that I grew up with, and I love every single one of those songs. I don't care what you think of that stuff. I love that. That is my Chicago. The other Chicago, it's okay. It's all right. Don't get me wrong, but I love this stuff with Peter Cetera. I was always a big fan of that stuff from the 80s, but then that's when I grew up with those guys, right? You guys grew up with them in a different era. I'm sure you like that. Chicago 21, I do enjoy that album. And this was an unreleased album for a long time, Stone of Sisyphus. which was, I'm trying to see if it was actually on here, 32 would have been the number for that album, but like I said, never released at that time. This is Creedence Clearwater Revisited. So we got two of the guys from Creedence Clearwater Revival doing a live show under a very close name to the original, of course, bringing in as much recognition as they can to keep things going. And hey, why not? Phil Collins, hits. I've got a whole box set behind me up there of the Phil Collins albums reissued as 2 CD deluxe edition sets. David Crosby's solo album, Oh Yes I Can. David Crosby from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. In fact, we'll get to some of that here in a minute. Thousands Road. And this one here featuring Phil Collins joining him on the song Hero, which is the whole reason I picked that up and one of the first times I was ever exposed to David Crosby. Now we get into some Crosby, Stills, and Nash, the CSN album there. Then we get into Daylight, again, my personal favorite of all the Crosby, Stills, and Nash albums. I have my Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young albums kind of split up, actually. I've got one of them right here, American Dream, but I have the others with my Neil Young collection. I probably should move this one over there. That's one of the things, but I'm always torn. Do I keep it with Neil Young, who I'm the most, I love the most out of all of these guys, or do I keep them all with Crosby, Stills, and Nash? But then I always feel like it's missing from my Neil Young collection. So where do you keep it, right? That's what happens to me all the time when I'm trying to figure out what's going on my wall here. Where do I keep this stuff? And I can't just keep it all together. All right, we got Live It Up, which, again, I really like this album. These are later day era albums from Crosby, Stills, and Nash are some of my favorites. This was the one I was first exposed to after the storm. In the early 90s, they did an Unplugged series, and it was around the time of this album, so I was checking that out. Oh, look at that. I do have another one of the Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young albums out here. Looking forward. I love this. This is the first of the CSNY albums that I picked up. Again, as a Neil Young fan, I picked it up, but found out I'm actually a big fan of Graham Nash. I now have all Graham Nash solo stuff. I've got a number of things from David Crosby. Of course, I was a fan of his from the Byrds, but never really gotten so much into the Stephen Stills stuff. I have a little bit of his stuff, but just not as into his stuff as much as I am the other three guys. And Deja Vu Live by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, where they were actually out promoting Neil Young's album Living with War at the time, which the other guys don't appear on, so I'm not really sure why they did it, other than Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young were always about protest and standing up and having a message and believing in something. And the Living with War album really was that. It was a fantastic protest album. And I think everyone just believed in it so much so that they went out to go do it. But very cool to hear CSNY doing the Neil Young album and the new flavor that it gave to it. All right, we've got the CSN demos reissued, or not, well, yeah, reissued, I mean, gathered up at least and put out by Rhino Records. That was a pretty cool thing there. And then we've got an actual greatest hits from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Moving into Crazy Horse and Crazy Moon. So we're talking about Neil Young and then Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Well, the Crazy Horse guys actually did solo stuff outside of, or that's not really solo, but just stuff without Neil Young. And that's a great album right there. Neil Young does actually appear on that. This one here, Left for Dead, an album in the late 80s. I want to say around 89, give or take. But this one here, very good stuff. Like that one a lot myself. We got The Cars, Just What I Needed, a 2-disc anthology series, which featured some killer unreleased material at the time when that first came out. Made it totally worthwhile. I put these two down because these were on the top, but I want to show them to you. Coverdale Page, so David Coverdale, Jimmy Page, partnering up on their one and only collaborative album. So good. Love this stuff here. We also get the David Coverdale solo album. This one here, technically his second one. This is Into the Light, but he had done Restless Heart which would later be released as a Whitesnake album, or not later, actually it came out in Japan as Whitesnake, but it came out in the US, I think, as David Coverdale, because he really had wanted it that way, had recorded it as a solo album. But I always see Restless Heart as a Whitesnake album because that's how I first got a hold of it, as a Japanese edition. But at the same time, I know that technically this is his second solo album. This one here is about ready to get a box set reissue where it's done in the full-on Whitesnake style. So I've heard that he's going to essentially extract it and take it from being a solo album and turn it into a full-on Whitesnake album, enhancing it and everything. The Cross, Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know. This features the drummer from Queen, Roger Taylor, on vocals. And I've always liked his vocals. I thought he was a fantastic vocalist. I loved it when he would sing a song with Queen. So when he went out to go do this, and they made 3 albums together, I was loving it. I thought fantastic. I mean, it's very sad, obviously, that Freddie Mercury had passed away, but Brian May going out and making solo albums, Roger Taylor, I loved all that stuff. Moving into Eddie and the Cruisers from the movie On the Dark Side. Got that soundtrack. You guys always asking about soundtracks that I have. My favorite, though, is their follow-up and first standalone album, Tough All Over. This here is the best thing that they ever did. And, of course, this is John Cafferty, the Beaver Brown Band, so not under the name Eddie and the Cruisers. Had some success with that on MTV, doing some New Year's Eve gigs and things like that. They were the it band for a while. Roadhouse, another album that the Beaver Brown Band did that was completely standalone from a film. And I tend to actually like those best. Having to hold on to this over here because this is about ready to fall. I'll show it to you in just a second. Eddie and the Cruisers 2, the second movie that they did together, and the Allen Collins Band. So got Allen Collins from Lynyrd Skynyrd and one of his solo albums here. This is Here, There, and Back. So hard to find this one. Took me a long time to dig this one up here. All right, so let me show you this because this is about to topple over. It's a stack that's meandering every which way. But there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. You got to see some cool stuff that I've got here. And I hope it gave you guys some ideas of things to go out and search yourself. But that is what is on my CD wall and where we are at in number 4 here. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a good one. And I'll talk to you real soon.